The air tasted of metal and dust, a constant abrasive whisper against the tongue. Kale knew no other flavor. His people, the chained, lived their lives in the deep mines of the underrealm, extracting the shimmering ore that fueled the great engines. Above, the sky shell glowed, a perpetual, unmoving disk of soft, white light. It was their sun, their moon, their entire celestial sphere. The elders taught that the sky shell was the benevolent eye of the creators, watching over their toil, providing the light necessary for life. Kale, like all chained, believed this truth without question. His days were a rhythm of pickaxe against a rock, the clang echoing in the vast subterranean caverns. His skin, pale from generations without true sunlight, felt the constant chill of the deep. His eyes, accustomed to the low luminescence of the ore veins and the distant glow of the sky shell, the subtle shift of rock strata. He was a miner, as was his father, and as his father before him. This was the purpose of the chained, to serve. One cycle, a tremor unlike any Kale had ever experienced, shook the underrealm. It was not like the usual rumble of a distant rockfall or the thrum of the great engines. This was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of their world. Dust rained from the cavern ceiling, thick and choking. Miners scrambled for cover, their shouts swallowed by the grinding roar. Kale pressed himself against a rock face, his heart hammering against his ribs. When the shaking subsided, an eerie silence settled, broken only by the ragged breaths of his fellow miners. Then a new sound emerged, a faint, high-pitched whine. It grew, piercing the silence, a sound that grated on his teeth. It came from above, from the direction of the sky shell. Panic rippled through the mining crew. The sky shell was sacred, inviolable. No sound had ever come from it. Yet Kale remembered old lullabies, whispered tales from his grandmother, of a song of the sky, a soft, distant hum that sometimes accompanied the deepest sleeps. He had always dismissed it as a child's fancy, a trick of the cavern winds. No, now the sound was no lullaby. Elder Roic, his face a road map of ancient lines, emerged from the crowd, his staff tapping against the stone floor. Silence, his voice through the murmuring. The creators test our faith. Return to your work. The ore must flow. Kale, however, could not return to his work. The whine persisted, a thin, insistent needling in his mind. He looked up, past the scaffolding and the ore chutes, towards the distant, unblinking eye of the sky shell. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmering pulsed at its edge. He blinked, thinking it a trick of the dust. But the shimmer remained. It was a hairline fracture, a minute crack in the perfect white surface. The next few cycles, Kale found himself drawn to the observation deck, a high ledge overlooking the main shaft, where the sky shell was most clearly visible. He watched the crack. Each cycle, it seemed to lengthen, a slow, deliberate crawl across the luminous disk. He mentioned it to his friend, Lyra, a nimble-fingered artisan who crafted the intricate gears. The sky shell is cracking, Lyra, Kale whispered, his voice hushed with a fear he could not name. Lyra scoffed, her hands still busy with a tiny cog. Nonsense, Kale. The elders say it is the light of the creators, eternal and whole. You work too hard in the dark. Your eyes play tricks. He tried to explain the shimmer, the growing line, but she merely shook her head, dismissing his work as the ramblings of a tired miner. The chain were not meant to question, only to obey. Yet the crack grew, and with its growth, the whining intensified, a constant low thrum that vibrated in Kale's bones. Other miners began to notice, their whispers growing louder, more anxious. Heroic, his face now etched with a deeper worry, called for increased production. The creator demands more. Their light falters. Kale knew the ore flow had never been stronger. The chain worked tirelessly, driven by the fear of the sky shell's dimming light. One cycle, as Kale was hauling a heavy ore, he saw it. A piece of sky shell, no larger than his thumb, detaching and drifting downwards. It was not light, as he had always imagined. It was a shard of something hard, crystalline, and strangely dull. It spun slowly, catching the faint light from the main body of the sky shell, before disappearing into the blackness of the lowest levels. Kale dropped his cart. The clang echoed through the cavern. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cold dread that bloomed in his chest. This was no test of faith. This was a fracturing in the very fabric of their existence. That night, Kale did not sleep. The image of the falling shard burned in his mind. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his bone, that the elders were wrong. The sky shell was not the eye of the creators. It was something physical, something that could break. He had to see it to understand. He waited until the shift change, when the tunnels were quiet, and the few guards were drowsy. He slipped away from the sleeping quarters, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. He moved through the familiar labyrinth of the underrealm, past the rumbling great engines, their rhythmic pulse a comforting lie. He headed for the lowest levels, where the shard had fallen. The air grew colder, each breath frosty rasp, and the darkness deepened to an oppressive velvet weight. The faint glow of the sky shell was almost entirely obscured by the intervening rock and machinery. Kale used the small glowing moss he carried, its faint light casting dancing shadows. He searched for hours, his fingers tracing every crevice, every loose stone. He found it near a disused ventilation shaft, wedged between two jagged rocks. It was a sliver of the sky shell, dull and strangely heavy in his palm, like a piece of frozen dead light. It felt cold, smooth, and utterly inert, a stark, unsettling contradiction to the benevolent glow he had always worshipped. This was not light. This was material. This was a lie. He turned it over and over, his mind racing. If the sky shell was not light, what was it? And what was beyond it? The elder spoke of the void, a place of nothingness, a vast expanse where life could not exist. But if the sky shell was a physical barrier, then perhaps the void was not empty. Kale knew he had to go higher, to the very top of the underrealm, to the point closest to the sky shell. There was a legend whispered among the chained of an ancient forbidden passage, a vertical shaft that led to the upper reaches. It was said to be guarded by ancient mechanisms and by the spirits of those who had dared to question the creators. He returned to his sleeping quarters, the shard clutched in his hand. He hid it in a small, hollowed-out rock near his sleeping pallet. He needed a plan. He would need to be careful. The next few cycles were a blur of work and clandestine research. Kale sought out the oldest miners, those whose memories stretched back further than the elders' official histories. He asked subtle questions, listened to old songs and forgotten tales. He learned of a time before the great engines, a time when the sky shell was a different color, a deeper, richer blue. He learned of whispers of stars, tiny pinpricks of light that danced beyond the blue. He also heard about the song of the sky, not just a lullaby, a low hum that foretold great shifts, though its true meaning had been lost to time and reinterpretation by the elders. He also learned of the Silent Guard, a sect of chained who maintained the great engines and the structural integrity of the underrealm. They were rarely seen, their faces always obscured by heavy hoods, their movements precise and unyielding. They were the enforcers of the elders' will, the silent watchers who ensured the chained remained in their place. Kale began to observe the Silent Guard. He noticed their patrols, their routines. He saw them enter and exit a hidden door disguised as a rock face near the central power conduit. This door, he suspected, led to the forbidden passage. One night, under the cover of a simulated rockfall, a controlled demolition used to open new ore veins, Kale made his move. The chaos and dust provided the perfect distraction. He slipped past the distracted silent guard, his heart pounding, and found the forbidden door. It was heavy, made of a dark, unyielding metal, and sealed with a complex series of interlocking gears. He remembered a story, a children's rhyme about the gears of truth. It spoke of aligning the gears to reveal what was hidden. Kale, a miner, understood gears. He began to manipulate them, his fingers working with a desperate precision. Click, whir, soft groan. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow, vertical shaft, shrouded in darkness. The air in the shaft was different, thinner, colder. It carried a faint metallic scent, like old machinery. Kale began to climb, pulling himself by an ancient rusted rungs embedded in the rock. The climb was arduous, seemingly endless. He passed diffused platforms, abandoned tools, strange archaic symbols carved into the stone. The whine of the sky shell grew louder, a higher pitch hum that vibrated through the very rock. This was the song of the sky from the legends, now a deafening roar of impending doom. After what felt like cycles, he reached the top. The shaft opened into a vast, circular chamber. The air here was even colder. The metallic scent was stronger. And the sky shell. It was directly above him, immense and blinding. He shielded his eyes, but the crack was undeniably there. A jagged fissure running across its entire surface. And through the crack, Kale saw it. Not the void, not nothingness. He saw stars. Not the comforting uniform glow of the sky shell, but tiny, brilliant pinpricks of light, scattered like spilled diamonds across an infinite, terrifying blackness. They pulsed, they twinkled, they were real, and beyond them a faint, swirling mist of impossible colors, a nebula, vast and silent, mocking the every truth he had ever known. The sky shell was not a benevolent eye. It was a dome, a massive artificial shell that enclosed their world. A cold wave of nausea churned in Kale's gut, threatening to buckle him to his knees. His entire life, every whispered lesson, every sacrificed truth, splintered into dust around him, leaving only the bitter taste of betrayal. This was not a planet. They were inside something, a vessel, an ark. He looked around the chamber. It was filled with massive, intricate machinery, humming with low, powerful energy. Cables as thick as his body snaked across the floor, connecting to giant conduits that disappeared into the floor and ceiling. And in the center of the chamber, a colossal lens, surface shimmering with an eternal light, projected the white glow onto the dome above. That was the source of the sky shell's light. This was the deception. He heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the silent guard. Kale scrambled for cover, pressing himself behind a towering console. Two figures, cloaked and hooded, entered the chamber. They moved with a practiced efficiency, checking gauges, adjusting levers. Their faces were hidden, but Kale could feel their presence, cold and unyielding. He listened, strained to understand their hushed conversation. They spoke in a language Kale barely understood, a formal, archaic dialect reserved for the elders and the guard. But he caught fragments, words that chilled him to the bone. Structural integrity, power fluctuations, containment breach. They were contained? One of the guards pointed to the crack in the sky shell. The breach expands. The pressure is increasing. The other replied, the elders are aware. They say the chain must work harder. The engines must not fail. Kale's mind reeled. The chain were not serving the creator. They were serving the silent guard, the elders, who maintained this elaborate prison. The ore they mined, the great engines they fueled, it was all to keep the deception alive, to maintain this containment. He needed to know more. He needed to understand the purpose of this ark, this moon-sized vessel. He needed to know why his people were enslaved, why they were kept in darkness. He waited until the guards left. Then he emerged from his hiding place. He approached the consoles, his fingers hovering over the unfamiliar controls. He was a miner, not an engineer, but he had seen the silent guard operate these machines. He had observed their movements, the sequence of their actions. He pressed a glowing button. A screen flickered to life, displaying a complex array of schematics and data. It was overwhelming, but Kale focused on the visual displays. He saw a diagram of their world, not a planet, but a massive cylindrical vessel, its interior honeycombed with levels. The underrealm was just one section. Above it, he saw other sections labeled biodomes, research labs, command core. And outside the vessel, a vast, empty expanse. No, not empty. He saw other vessels, small, darker shapes, drifting in the blackness, a fleet. His breath hitched. They were not alone, and this ark was not on a lone journey. He scrolled through the data, his mind struggling to comprehend. He found logs, ancient entries, detailing the Great Exodus, a desperate flight from a dying world. Their world, the original world. It had been ravaged by a cataclysm, a quote, great blight, that had consumed all life. This ark, the Vanguard, was the last hope, a vessel designed to carry the remnants of their civilization to a new home. And the Chained, they were not a slave race. They were the descendants of the original crew, genetically altered, their memories suppressed, their purpose twisted. They were the engine keepers, bred for strength and obedience, their lives dedicated to maintaining the Vanguard on its millennia-long journey. The Elders and the Silent Guard were the descendants of their original command crew, maintaining the lie, preserving the illusion to prevent panic, to ensure the mission's success. As Kale scrolled further, a particular log entry caught his eye, a personnel record from the earliest days of the Exodus. It detailed the difficult decision to implement Keeper Protocol, the genetic alteration and memory suppression. And then a name, a signature at the bottom of the entry, Elder Kaleem, first Keeper of the Vanguard. A name shockingly similar to his own, and a lineage he never knew he had. The truth was a hammer blow to his soul. His people were not slaves by birth, but by design. His own ancestor, a man who bore his name, had been one of the earliest architects of this grand deception. A profound sorrow settled over him, heavier than any orc heart. It was not just the lie, but the personal betrayal, stretching back through generations, that truly twisted the knife. His own blood was stained by this deception. He saw the images of the original world, a vibrant green planet teeming with life. He saw the blight, a creeping darkness that consumed everything. He saw the desperate launch of the Vanguard, a desperate gamble against extinction. And he saw the destination, a distant, shimmering blue-green orb, a new world, still light cycles away. Kel felt a surge of rage, cold and pure, rising to meet the sorrow. They had been lied to, their heritage stolen, their lives reduced to mindless toil. The Silent Guard, the Elders, they were not benevolent protectors, they were jailers, and his own blood was stained by this deception. He heard the footsteps again, closer this time. He had been too long. But he couldn't leave without proof. He couldn't leave without a way to show the people the truth. He looked around frantically. His eyes fell on a small, portable data slate, lying on a nearby console. He grabbed it, his fingers fumbling for the unfamiliar interface. He managed to download a few schematics, a snippet of the Exodus log, and most importantly, an image of the new world, the Promised Land. He heard voices. They were coming. Kel slipped back into the vertical shaft. The data slate clutched tightly in his hand. He descended as quickly as he could, his muscles screaming in protest. He heard shouts above, the clanging of metal. They knew he was there. He reached a hidden floor, fumbling with gears, and slipped through just as the Silent Guard reached the top of the shaft. He heard their frustrated shouts, the thud of their boots as they searched the chamber. He ran. He ran through the tunnels, past the sleeping quarters, past the great engines. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached. He ran until he reached the safety of his own sleeping pallet, where he collapsed, gasping for breath. He pulled out the data slate, its small screen glowing faintly in the darkness. The image flickered, the vanguard in space, the dying world, the new world, a beacon of hope. He had to show them, he had to tell them, but who was to believe him? The elders had woven a tapestry of lies for centuries. His people were conditioned to obey, to believe. He thought of Lyra, her skepticism, her dismissal of his observation. He thought of Elder Roic, his unwavering pronouncements. Their truth would be a shock, a betrayal of everything they knew. Kale knew he could not simply announce his findings. He had to cultivate questions, to plant seeds of doubt. He needed to show, not to tell, the abnormality. He started small. He began to leave the sky shell shard in visible places, near the ore chutes, on the edge of the mess hall table. He would accidentally drop it, allowing others to see it, to touch it, to wonder why a piece of the sacred light felt so cold and dead. Kale found something from the sky shell. It doesn't feel like light. The elders say it's impossible. The silent guard noticed. Kale felt their eyes on him, their hooded figures appearing in unexpected quarters. But he knew they were watching, waiting. He needed allies. He thought of Lyra, her mind sharp, her practical nature. He approached her again, this time with the data slate. Lyra, he said, his voice low, I need you to see something. He showed her the image of the vanguard in space, a tiny speck against the vastness. Her eyes widened, her fingers tracing the outline of the vessel. What is this, Kale? She whispered, her voice trembling. He explained carefully, slowly, the great exodus, the dying world, the true purpose of the vanguard. He showed her the schematics, the biodomes, the research labs. He showed her the image of the new world, a vibrant blue and green. She listened, her face a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror. We are not on a planet, Kale said. We are on an ark. And we are not serving creators. We are serving a lie. Lyra was a pragmatist. The visual evidence, undeniable and stark, broke through centuries of indoctrination. Her initial shock gave way to a cold fury. They lied to us all this time. Yes, Kale confirmed, and they continue to lie. The crack in the sky shell is growing. The vanguard is failing. We are running out of time. This was the ticking clock, the failing arc, the expanding breach. Lyra, with her network of artisans and engineers, became his first true ally. They began to subtly spread the truth, using the objects of Kale had provided as proof. The sky shell shards appeared in more places. Whispers grew into open discussion. Doubt, once a forbidden thought, now festered in the mind of the chained. The elders, sensing the unrest, increased their sermons, their pronouncements of faith and obedience. The silent guard intensified their patrol, their presence a palpable threat. Kale knew he needed a larger audience. He needed to expose the truth to everyone. He thought of the Great Assembly, the monthly gathering where the elders delivered their pronouncements and the chained offered their collective prayers to the sky shell. He and Lyra began to plan. Lyra, with her knowledge of the ventilation system, devised a way to project the images from Kale's data slate onto the inner surface of the sky shell itself during the assembly. The risk was immense. If caught, they would face the wrath of the silent guard, perhaps even death. But the alternative was to let their people live and die in a lie, on a failing ark, never knowing the truth of their heritage or the promise of a new world. The day of the great assembly arrived. The vast cavern, usually filled with rhythmic clang and pickaxe, was silent, save for the hushed murmurs of the assembled chained. The elders stood on a raised platform, their robes shimmering in the light of the sky shell. Elder Roic, his voice booming, began their traditional prayer. O creators, whose light sustain us, whose wisdom guides us. As he spoke, Lyra, hidden in the ventilation shaft above, activated their projection. A ripple, like a shiver through a vast, living organism, went through the crowd. The white light of the sky shell pulsed, then flickered, its sacred glow distorting. Suddenly, the very air seemed to crackle as images bloomed across its surface. Not the pure, benevolent light they knew, but swirling nebula, distant alien stars, and then the familiar outline of their own world, not as a planet, but as a colossal vessel, drifting through the terrifying blackness of space. A collective, staggered gasp rose from the chain, a sound like 1,000 breaths held then released. Whispers erupted, then a roar of disbelief. Elder Rorik faltered, his voice dying in his throat. The other elders stared, their faces pale with shock and fury. Then the images shifted again. The dying world, consumed by creeping blight, the desperate launch of the Vanguard, and finally the vibrant blue-green orb of a new world, a beacon of hope in the endless void. The silent guard moved, their weapons drawn, their hooded figures advancing on the crowd, but there were too many chained, their numbers overwhelming. Kale, standing amidst the throng, felt a surge of exhilaration. The truth was out, the lie was broken. Elder Roik, his face contorted with rage, pointed a trembling finger at Kale. Treason, blasphemy, this is the trick of the void, a test of your faith. But his words were lost in the clamor. The chained, seeing the undeniable evidence projected above them, were no longer afraid. They were angry, they were betrayed. Kale stepped forward, his voice clear and strong, amplified by the natural acoustics of the cavern. They lied to us for centuries. We are not on a planet. We are on the Vanguard, an ark, carrying the last remnants of our people to a new home. He held up the data slate, its screen displaying the images of the new world. This is our future, not the endless toil in the dark, but a vibrant, living world. The silent guard, outnumbered and uncertain, hesitated. Their authority, built on centuries of unquestioning obedience, crumbled under the weight of the revealed truth. Though momentum shifted, the chained, once a docile workforce, became a unified force. They surged past the silent guard, their eyes fixed on the images projected above. Elder Roik, seeing his power dissolved, made a desperate plea. The truth will shatter us. The mission will fail. We must remain united in our purpose. But his words were hollow. The purpose he spoke of was a lie. Kale, with Lyra by his side, led the charge. They moved towards the central shaft, the forbidden passage, the path to the upper reaches. The chained followed, a tide of awakening. The silent guard, their ranks broken, fell back. Some joined the surging crowd, their hoods falling away to reveal faces etched with their own dawning realization. The climb to the upper reaches was no longer a solitary, fearful journey. It was a mass exodus. The chained, their eyes now fixed on the distant stars projected on the sky shell, climbed with a new profound purpose. They reached for the vast chambers, the heart of the Vanguard. The colossal lens hammered, still projecting the deceptive light. Kale, guided by the schematics he had downloaded, found the main power conduit. We must shut it down, he shouted over the din. The sky shell must fall. A group of engineers, their faces grim but determined, joined him. They worked quickly, their hands flying over the controls, their knowledge of the great engines now turned against their former masters. With a final resounding thud, the power flickered, then died. The colossal lens went dark. The sky shell, no longer illuminated, became a dull, opaque dome, and through the glowing cracks, the true sky, the vast star-strewn expanse of the cosmos became visible. A collective gasp, then a roar of wonder rose from the chained. They looked up, their faces upturned, seeing for the first time the true universe, the infinite possibilities beyond their confined world. The Vanguard continued its journey, but now the chained were no longer blind passengers. They were the crew, awakened to their true purpose, their true heritage. The elders and the remaining loyal silent guard were apprehended, their authority shattered. The truth, raw and powerful, was now undeniable. The coming cycles were difficult. The chain had to adapt to the new reality. The Vanguard was old, its system strained. The crack in the outer hull, once a mere shimmer, was now a visible breach, requiring constant repair. The journey to the new world was still long, fraught with danger, but now they worked with a different kind of purpose. They were not toiling in ignorance, they were building a future. They were repairing their home, not for a lie, but for a truth. Kale, once a simple miner, became a leader. Guided by Lyra and a council of newly awakened engineers and artisans, they studied the ancient logs, deciphered the complex schematics, and began to understand the true scope of the ancestors' journey. They learned of the Great Sleep, a period when the original crew had entered stasis, leaving the engine keepers to maintain the Ark. The elders had been tasked with overseeing this, but over generations the truth had been twisted, the purpose corrupted, and the engine keepers had become the chained. Their journey was still perilous. The Vanguard faced meteor showers, solar flares, and the vast, unsettling emptiness of space. But now, when a warning siren blared, the chain responded with knowledge, not blind obedience. They understood the stakes. They understood their place in the universe. One cycle, as Kale stood on the observation deck, the true sky shell above him, he saw it, a faint, shimmering crescent on the horizon, the new world. It was still distant, a faint promise in the blackness, but it was there, real, tangible. He thought of his ancestors, those who had launched the Vanguard into the unknown. He thought of the lie that had sustained his people for centuries, a necessary evil perhaps, in the face of overwhelming despair, but a lie nonetheless. He looked at the faces of the chained around him, their eyes no longer downcast, but gazing upward, filled with a newfound hope. They were no longer slaves to a deception, they were pioneers, charting a course to a new beginning. The metal taste in their air remained, but now it was mixed with faint, sweet sense of possibility. Their journey was not over, but the darkness had lifted. The truth had set them free.